Hi, everyone. Welcome to my video series on the heroine's journey. I'm Susanna Liller, and it's time to find your happiness. So I want to talk to you today about boundaries, imaginary boundaries that we put up so to segment ourselves off from other people, from ideas that we don't like, boundaries. And also perspective taking, the benefits of getting way back and how that changes your view and what kind of a shift that might cause in you. And so to talk about this, I want to talk to you about Peter Senge, who, of course, wrote his famous book. And I was working in organizational development with teams who were very polarized. You're kind of used to that today. Certainly, we see it everywhere. And the teams that I worked with, there was a lot of us and them, and it's their fault, and finger pointing. And so, any way that I could find to show them a different perspective of working together, I introduced. And so I read the Fifth Discipline because of all the wisdom in there and so much about teams and how teams can be successful. But I'll tell you, many years now later, what I remember the most from is the story that Peter Senge told about the astronaut Rusty Zwickert and his trip in Apollo 9 going around the Earth. And it's quite a story. And he tells it very poetically. Rusty does himself. So Peter got it from Rusty telling it at the Lindisfarne conference. And the Lindisfarne Island is in the way northeastern corner of England, close to the border with Scotland, also known as the Holy Isle, because that was the first place of Christianity there in the British Isles. And Rusty had been invited to talk about his experience. And I will share the link with you so you can read for yourselves what he had to say. But I want to share with you a certain part of it. What made the biggest impact to him, because he says that, and he explains about the years of training and all the practice and the simulation and everything that the three astronauts who went on Apollo 9 in 1969, what they had to go through to be ready to make this trip. And of course, all these trips always were a step checking things out for the next step. And the next step was when somebody actually went on the moon. But this trip, he had a special role in particular. He was going to put on a special suit, put on a special, he calls it a fishbowl, but a helmet to be able to go out and leave the atmosphere of the capsule and stand on a little porch and show that that's doable. And so he really talks about it in a very poetic way. And what really struck me is his sense that in looking out at the little blue marble, which is how Earth looks to people when they're way, way, way out in space, he was struck by how beautiful it was and how there weren't any boundaries. He couldn't see any lines or fences. And then, the feeling that, well, we arbitrarily draw them anyway because there really aren't any. The Earth didn't come that way. It's we human beings who do it. And my point with the groups was always, well, so it's your choice. You're drawing these boundaries. They really don't exist, but you're making them up because of how you feel about things. That was my point with the group. But also he talks about attachment and how when he goes around, initially it's so, and he went around 151 times around the Earth, this same orbit. He talks about it, 151 sunrises. And at first, as he saw different continents come up, they were new, and he would go around and then he would see, but there, he would recognize there's California, and then there's the Astrodome, and then there's Florida. He knew those places. He calls them friendly because he was attached to them. He knew them. And then he keeps going around. But then what happens? After a while, he knows what to anticipate. And then Africa becomes familiar and friendly, and he gets attached to that. And so the same with the teams. They don't know each other. They get put together in a room. We talk about what's bothering so-and-so and what's bothering so-and-so. And eventually they get familiar with this new territory of being brought together. And they get to know each other better, and it's familiar and it's friendly, and it causes a shift in perspective, a new paradigm. So that's why I used it. And I also use it, and I give this to everybody that takes my course, because I think it's a perspective that everybody should share or know about. But I'm going to read some of his words because he says it far better than I do. So here we go. And I'll interrupt every now and then. But he talks about the benefits. Of course, he comes back from a trip like this, and everybody needs to know, what did you learn? What struck you? And he talks about so many benefits that are scientific, that are very important. But then he says, but in some ways, there are other benefits which are more significant. I think that you've played a part in a changing concept of man and what life is all about. This is pretty significant. And he always talks about you. He doesn't say I very much. In fact, I don't know if he does at all, because he's making the point that this was done for you, for us, for humanity on this little small planet. And so it's you. A relationship that you have assumed all these years, and not just you, but man, humanity, the whole of history has assumed that relationship to a planet which is now changed. And you now know that because it's a part of your gut, not a part of your head. So here he talks about the trip. But up there, you go around every hour and a half, time after time after time. And you wake up, usually in the mornings, and just the way the track of your orbits go, you wake up over the Middle East and North Africa. And as you eat breakfast, you look out the window as you're going past, and there's the Mediterranean area, Greece and Rome, and North Africa and the Sinai, that whole area. And you realize that in one glance, what you're seeing is what was the whole history of man for years, the cradle of civilization. And you think of all that history that you can imagine looking at that scene. And you go around down across North Africa and out over the Indian Ocean and look up at that great subcontinent of India pointed down towards you as you go past it. Ceylon off to the side, and Burma, Southeast Asia, out over the Philippines and up across that monstrous Pacific Ocean, vast body of water. You've never realized how big that is before. And you finally come up across the coast of California and you look for those friendly things. So here he is identifying this to him. They're friendly. He knows this. Los Angeles and Phoenix and on across to El Paso. In some ways, again, this is me, in some ways, it's his comfort zone, right? And there's Houston, there's home, and you look, and sure enough, there's the Astrodome. And you identify with that. It's an attachment. We all come to our meetings, our encounters, our relationships with attachments, what's friendly for us, what we identify with. Back to Rusty and on across to New Orleans. And then looking down to the south, there's the whole peninsula of Florida laid out. And all the hundreds of hours you spent flying across that route down in the atmosphere, all that is friendly again. And you go out across the Atlantic Ocean and back across Africa, and you do it again and again and again. And remember, he said 151 times around the world. And that identity, he says, that you identify with Houston, and then you identify with Los Angeles and Phoenix and New Orleans and everything. These are the things he's telling us he knows. He feels they're friendly. And then he continues, and the next thing you recognize in yourself is you're identifying with North Africa. You look forward to that. You anticipate it. And there it is. And that whole process begins the shift of what it is you identify with. When you go around the earth in an hour and a half, and just think about that for a minute, go around the earth in an hour and a half, back to him, you begin to recognize that your identity is with the whole thing. And that makes a change. And you look down there and you can't imagine how many borders and boundaries you cross again and again and again. And you don't even see them. And that wake-up scene, the year before, there you are, hundreds of people killing each other over some imaginary line that you're not even aware of. And from where you see it, the thing is a whole, and it's so beautiful. And you wish you could take one in each hand and say, look, one from each side. Look at it from this perspective. Look at that. What's important? Reading this again, I think, if we could take everybody up there and have them look at it and say, what's important? Do you see a line? Do you see a boundary? Do you see a fence? He keeps going. And so a little later on, when your friends, again, those same neighbors, the person next to you goes out to the moon, and now he looks back and he sees the earth not as something big where he can see the beautiful details, but now he sees the earth as a small thing out there. And now that contrast between that bright blue and white Christmas tree ornament or marble and black sky, that infinite universe, really comes through. And the size of it, the significance of it, it becomes both things. It becomes so small and so fragile and such a precious little spot in that universe that you can block out with your thumb. And you realize that on that small spot, that little blue and white thing is everything that means anything to you. All of history and music and poetry and art and war and death and birth and love, tears, joy, games, all of it on that little spot out there that you can cover with your thumb. And you realize that that perspective has, that you've changed, that there's something new there. That relationship is no longer what it was. And again, my purpose in sharing this with you and with those themes, those teams, was to give them that new perspective, a new relationship, that would be no longer what it was, that fragmented, fighting relationship. And then he has this experience that really, he says, was a gift to him. So he had to put on this suit and go out there and attach to a long, I'm going to say tube, but I'm sure that's not the right word, a line. He's standing on a ledge. He's out of the capsule. His co-astronaut is inside taking a picture of him. He's taking a picture of the capsule. And then there's a malfunction in the camera. So he is able, even though he had such an aggressive schedule, he's always talking about, we were 45 minutes late. We had to hurry. There were so much to do, even though it was for 10 days and he had a lot of time. But he said, because the camera malfunctioned, that could make the time to think about what was happening. And you recall standing out there at the spectacle that went before your eyes, because now you're no longer inside the spaceship, something with a window looking out at a picture, but now you're out there, and what you've got around your head is a goldfish bowl, and there are no limits to it. There are no frames. There are no boundaries. You're really out there over it, floating, going 25,000 miles an hour, ripping through space in a vacuum. And there's not a sound. There's a silence, the depth of which you've never experienced before. And that silence contrasts so markedly with the scenery of what you're seeing and the speed with which you know you're going intellectually in your head. That contrast, the mix of those two things, really comes through. And then he talks about, do I deserve this? Do we deserve this fantastic experience? Have you earned this in some way? Are you separated out to be touched by God, to have some special experience here that other men cannot have? And you know the answer to that is no. There's nothing that you've done that deserves that earned that. It's not a special thing for you. You know very well at that moment, and it comes through to you so powerfully that you're the sensing element for man. You look down and you see all that surface of that globe that you've lived on all this time, and you know all those people down there, and they are like you, they are you, and somehow you represent them. You are up there as the sensing element, that point out on the end, and it's a humbling feeling. And he talks about being humbled by that and being the one that has to come and translate. And so I'm reading it to you, his words, as I did to the teams and to the women that take my Real Life Heroines course, so you can hear his translation and benefit from his feelings of awe at the immensity of it, and the realization that we're all here together, and all the boundaries are all made up by us. And that goes for the boundaries that and the limits that you put internally to yourself. We're always placing imaginary boundaries. So I hope that this will be instructive for you. Maybe you'll remember it just the way I continue to remember it. In his title, There Are No Boundaries. And what a perspective to have shared with us. Thank you for joining me. I hope you'll join me for the next video, and have a wonderful journey in the meantime.